Inuyashiki's greatest asset is also its most notable weakness. Its premise. A normal, unassuming old man is given the power of a robot demigod at the cost of his living humanity, forcing him to ask the question of what makes him a man. The dichotomy is laid bare through Ando, the only character to interact with both main protagonist, Ichiro Inuyashiki, and his antagonist, Hiro Shishigami. Ichiro is distraught by his new form, choosing to take his new power and do good so that he might reaffirm his humanity, which Ando notes makes him even more of a human than anyone he's known. Hiro, however, displaying sociopathic tendencies even before his transformation, takes his change as a reason to distance himself further from humanity, finding enjoyment in taking life. It forms a self-fulfilling cycle, his wanton murder inciting negative reactions from the rest of humanity, further vindicating him in his separation. The mistake in his beliefs never becomes outright apparent to him, even as it manifests itself in his actions. He wants to be seen as human just as Ichiro does. When Hiro's mother unknowingly calls him a monster, he swears off murder so as to not disappoint her further, a personal promise not set to last too long after he makes it. Shion is made readily aware that Hiro isn't human, but he's once again pulled away from his plans for murder when she looks past what he is and pleads to him as a person. This humanity she shows him leads to the first instance of him opting to use his powers for the good of others, even if it's at Shion's insistence. But once again, it's not set to last. It's only when he is forcibly stripped from his ability to kill does he so easily give up, leading to the moment where he reaches out to Ando, only to be driven to tears after his only friend calls him a monster. And through this battle with rejection of himself by himself, and from the rejection of those he cares about, nothing comes of it. Even with no one truly left, he still sees the lives of Shion and Ando as valuable enough to sacrifice himself for them and the rest of humanity. But his sacrifice is ultimately negligible. Though he calculated that self-destructing himself would send the asteroid off course, in the end it didn't matter. His calculations were wrong, even though the incredible powers of Hiro and Ichiro have only ever been shown to be fallible against each other. And that's where we return to the issue. The conflict of the story is enabled by the robot powers, but said story is not about those powers. It's about the people using them, about those around them, and what they accomplish. As the moral center of the story, Ichiro serves as a stronger lens with which to view it as a whole. Takashi remarks that he wishes he were a robot too, and Ichiro says that he would not have taken the actions he did if it weren't for his struggles in life before his transformation. While Hiro had not known a pain to give him empathy, Ichiro knew too much pain throughout his life and still chose to help rather than harm. It's the humanity that guides his actions that in turn guides the story, and yet the actions he accomplishes purely on his humanity are simply not there. To get across what I mean, let's take a step back and ask, what does Ichiro accomplish on his own power? Not with his godly robot abilities, but what he does within human limitations. He saves Satoru and Mari in part through CPR, establishing that he cannot bring the dead back to life through his healing. Yet to take this as an accomplishment is dubious. Surrounding each instance of saving a life with CPR is first an arrival at the body through use of his powers, then further aid to the victim again through his powers. He saves Satoru, then Fumino. He flies into the burning skyscraper, then out again with Mari in hand. We're also given only brief glimpses into his personal life. Mari is at first shown to be embarrassed for her father's appearance given his age, and generally wants little to do with him. But after stumbling upon his nature as the miracle man healing the sick, her opinion begins to change on who he is as a person, if only through what he does as a robot. He then gives his pep talk to Takashi, and that's it. Little comes from the other scenes of his home life, and his workplace is irrelevant. The focus remains largely on the premise, what the characters do through their robot powers, at the cost of spending any time on what they do without them. Because the story dwells so much on what is secondary to the true conflict, shades of this arbitrarity eclipse the most climactic moments. Ichiro and Hiro finally clash in the end, but the battle does not conclude on their own power and choices. Their prior attempts to master their abilities are rendered negligible when they are both reduced to their robot attributes. These modes of operation at times act as extensions of their own thoughts, desires, and feelings. Ichiro avoids killing the children that assaulted a homeless man, instead having their reputations ruined irreparably through sharing their crime on social media. The Yakuza are crippled beyond recovery so that they might live the remainder of their lives in suffering, in return reflecting on the suffering they themselves caused, which Ichiro directly explains after the fact. But to say the final moment in the battle between Ichiro and Hiro ends on a note with as much meaning is stretching it. Ichiro destroys the satellite, using its debris as cover to sneak up on Hiro and disable him by removing his skull plate and arms. Hiro's automated form makes no such tactical move despite his better grasp of using his powers throughout the series, where Ichiro struggled. And the act of sending a satellite debris to the ground puts innocent lives at risk, which goes against Ichiro's desire to preserve life, outright shown previously when he was keeping civilians out of harm's way. It comes across as a clumsy way to write the end of the fight that had no other way to end. The divorce in Ichiro's actions from his prior character, and the lack of reaction or dialogue between the two, removes the emotional conflict from the battle, and thus the primary element of the story itself in its climax. Even though the audience is likely to be on Ichiro's side, with him being both the moral center and the underdog much less aware of his capabilities than Hiro, his actual victory is unearned because it happens outside of the control of his established character. Despite the extended conflict presented through these two characters throughout the series, it's never given a full resolution. Though the powers should be in service of the story, through being beholden to the premise, the story becomes dominated and overshadowed by that premise. The most meaningful conclusion to take from Inuyashiki is not here, but here. Thanks to Ichiro, Takashi chose to appreciate himself more and fought back against his oppressors. It's the most notable change any character has. He tries and succeeds where he failed to try before. After time and time again of the series showing people who can't do anything either trying and failing, or being too helpless to even try in the first place. Hiro's character arc ends without him addressing his actions. Ichiro feared not being accepted, but ultimately was because his family realized what kind of person remained at his core. It comes to a close because an asteroid appears, and through it being so impersonal and inhuman, the two main characters are given a choice without an arc preceding it, and come to a decision they would have made at any point between getting their powers and here. Ichiro begins the story unable to appreciate who he really is, yet he exists in a story that only wants to appreciate him for what he can do with the powers he was granted with, rather than what he could do as the human he wishes to see himself as, unfortunately leaving the series with only a shadow of humanity under the beacon of its very premise. Thanks again to my patrons such as Mathwiz, Volkyon, and Peter Cairns for making videos like this possible.